Hello, everyone, and welcome to the SCA's 52nd monthly Zoom presentation. We're now into our second half century, so to speak, of monthly SCA Zoom presentations with no end in sight. My name is Brian Gallagher. I'm the president of the Society for Commercial Archaeology, and I will be your host tonight. Welcome to all our guests and to any new people we have with us tonight. We're happy you took the time out of your late summer evening to watch an SCA presentation. I hope you enjoy the show. And for anybody watching the recording of this episode of the SCA's monthly presentations who is not a member of the SCA, we earnestly ask you to consider joining. Funding for the various activities of the SCA comes almost exclusively from our membership. Just visit our website at www.sca-roadside.org and follow the links. Now I have the pleasure of introducing tonight's presentation. Please welcome Amy Webb of the National Trust for Historic Preservation, who will be presenting a talk entitled Preserve Route 66, Preparing for the Centennial Celebration of America's Most Famous Road. U.S. Highway Route 66 was commissioned in 1926 and served as a major east-west transportation route until the 1980s when it was replaced by interstate highways. As the centennial anniversary of Route 66 approaches in 2026, learn more about how the National Trust for Historic Preservation is helping to preserve Route 66 sites and tell a fuller story along more than 2,400 miles of road between Chicago and Los Angeles through the Preserve Route 66 initiative. Amy Webb is a Senior Director for Preservation Programs at the National Trust. She currently leads the National Trust's Preserve Route 66 initiative, helping Route 66 communities prepare for the Route 66 Centennial in 2026. During the first 18 years of Amy's 30-year tenure at the National Trust, she managed the Trust's Heritage Tourism Program, a program that helped communities realize their heritage tourism potential through a community-centered approach. She has a master's in architectural history and historic preservation from the University of Virginia. So without further ado, Amy, I'd like to invite you to unmute yourself and start sharing your screen and give us your presentation.
Thank you, Brian. Let's see. Okay. Can you all see that?
Yeah, it's perfect. We can see it and we can hear you.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you to all of you for coming tonight and for indulging me to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is Route 66. I am going to be telling you a bit about what the National Trust is doing to preserve Route 66, but I'm also going to share some ways that you can help to preserve Route 66, either from your home, things that you can actually do online, as well as things that you can do if you are out traveling, because really I think that is going to be a key for the success of Route 66. At the National Trust, we do have this Preserve Route 66 initiative. So preserving Route 66, what does that mean? How do you preserve a road that is not a monolith, a road that has so many individual quirky little pieces of it, and pieces that we know, unfortunately, every year are disappearing. We're losing little bits of it every year. Most of the pieces on Route 66, most of the places are privately owned, so there's no oversight or control on this, and that can be a challenge. The National Trust has recognized this in different ways over the years. Back in 2007, the National Trust included the vintage motels of Route 66 on our list of 11 most endangered places in America. And we chose motels in particular for that listing because a motel is actually a kind of a purpose-built structure, way of building it. So it's hard to find different adaptive reuses, harder than it is with maybe some other kinds of structures. And we were seeing a couple of different kinds of threats to motels, but in larger cities, we were seeing that on the fringes of the city, as cities were expanding in urban areas, development was meaning that they had to tear something down to put in something new. And so we were losing parts of Route 66 that way. We had the opposite problem in rural areas where, because the traffic had gone to the interstate, we had motels that no longer had the economic use. And so they did not have a viable use in them, and they were derelict or would just be abandoned and were kind of demolition by neglect. But motels are certainly not the only part of Route 66 that has been endangered over the years. You're going to be having a great presentation next month about neon. Neon is also one of the top endangered things on Route 66. One of the things that I have learned through my work on Route 66 is that with neon, oftentimes it's become so popular, it's become a collectible. And so you actually have people who are purchasing neon signs for their own personal collections where they're no longer in the public view. They're no longer in their original location. And because neon has become so valuable as a collector, for a small business owner, if you come on hard times, your neon sign may be something that you can sell to get to raise the funding to keep your business going. And so it's hard sometimes to turn that down. And yet it's the neon signs that sometimes are the most iconic. And other things too, bridges. Bridges are a big ticket item. I was just reading in the paper this past week about concerns with climate change and concerns that the materials that were used to build bridges before the 1960s were different than the ones used today. And so with increasing dramatic swings of hot, cold, or very hot temperatures, they're finding that it's compromising some of the materials. So I thought, here we go, yet another threat for another part of Route 66. So, you have all of these things happening that are threats to Route 66. And at the same time, it's Route 66 is coming up on its centennial anniversary, which raises the question, what is Route 66 going to be in 2126? So let's see. All right. So I think you all know Route 66 pretty well, but just as a visual here, you can see that Route 66 runs from Chicago out to LA. It runs through 8 different states, Illinois, Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California. Just 13 miles of Kansas, just kind of catches that little corner there, but definitely goes through Kansas. A lot of miles. The road here shows at least one alignment in New Mexico that you can see that goes up to Santa Fe. But in some of the urban areas, Route 66 might have taken a number of different alignments going through town. So that's one of the reasons that there actually are more miles, because the road was not the same for the entire period that it was commissioned. With the centennial that's coming up in 2026, there's been increased attention to Route 66. I understand that you all may have an event in LA in 2026, which is fantastic. It will be a perfect time to be there. So again, that's a little background on Route 66. With the different states in Route 66, you may know that every single state actually has a state association for Route 66. And they all operate very independently. Most are volunteer run, a few have paid staff. And yet I think until about 10 or 12 years ago, there really had been no way to coordinate all of those states together. Some of them states talked together, others did not. So around maybe 2012, there was a convening that took place in Anaheim at Disneyland, very appropriately, with 100 invited people who came to talk about the future of Route 66. And the thought was that if we're trying to think about ways to really preserve all of these different quirky individual pieces of Route 66, that there were 2 things that were really important. One was to create a national nonprofit that would actually have the goal of unifying all of these state associations to speak as one voice for Route 66. And the other thing was to create a permanent federal designation for Route 66 as a National Historic Trail. And so I was privileged to actually be on the steering committee that helped to create the Route 66 Road Ahead Partnership, which is the nonprofit that actually does serve all the interests of Route 66. And then the National Trust actually took the lead in doing the advocacy work to try to get the permanent federal designation for Route 66. I will say that there had been reports that had been done, and Route 66 absolutely meets all of the criteria. But to become a National Historic Trail, it's quite a lift. There has to be legislation introduced in the House and approved, and in the Senate and approved, and the House and the Senate have to agree, which doesn't always happen. And once that has happened, then legislation for the National Historic Trail has to be signed into law by the President of the United States. So it's a pretty big lift. We fortunately at the National Trust have some government relations staff who can help us with this kind of advocacy. So we worked with an Illinois congressman to introduce legislation in 2018, and also got some support from different sponsors to do a road trip from Chicago to LA. You can see here the Airstream and the truck that we had to pull it. State Farm was one of our major sponsors, as was Airstream, as was Polaroid. And on this trip, we traveled the entire route, went through all 300 plus communities in the course of the summer, and had a number of different events that we would do. And the goal here was to raise awareness of Route 66, to hopefully bring a younger perspective to Route 66, and to try to get the next generation to be excited about what Route 66 had to offer, maybe to think about a broader definition of the kinds of places that were on Route 66 to tell a more complete story. And of course, to look at ways of supporting that National Historic Trail designation, to the advocacy. So how did we do that? So we did a couple things. First, we have these different events, these different campaign events. You can see here one of our roadies at one of the events, and we would have different prizes and all. And the goal was to have people learn more about Route 66 and hopefully sign an online petition that I'll talk about in a little bit as well. We had a lot of press surrounding this visit, so got all kinds of articles, television coverage, all kinds of things that we were able to use. So that was really successful. With this wheel that you can see here, people could win a whole variety of different kinds of swag. Here you can see we had 40,000 pieces of swag, from kerchiefs to stickers to, you name it. We had all kinds of different things that we were able to give away along the tour as people were coming to our different events. And we also, again, we're looking at, I was talking about that younger perspective. We recruited some young, diverse influencers, really social media influencers, to join different segments of the trip with us, and to focus on part of their payment, or part of their, kind of whatever they had to do for this, was to actually put together a story based on their particular interests. So we have us for the first part of the tour that was really interested in gay bars in Illinois and Missouri. So he did a lot of on Route 66. So he looked at a lot of things related to that and wrote a great blog post for us. We looked at different kinds of Asian restaurants. We looked at African American sites. So we had all kinds of things that we were doing, again, all through the lens of this younger perspective, and people who had already had some kind of a following before coming to us. And then the online petition. So we always invited people to come and to sign this petition. We were trying to get support from the different states along Route 66. At the end of, you can see here, as of February 2019, which was really when our campaign wrapped up, we had 64,000 online petition signatures. We have not yet gotten that designation. It's something that we still hope to do. So one really easy thing that all of you can do, if you have not already, is to go online on our website and push your name, add your name to this petition. One of the things that was really interesting about the petition, I had assumed that when we did this and when we mapped where people were from, that when we had a map of the US, that Route 66 would light up, that people would be from Route 66. That's what would be their connection. But what was really interesting to me was that was not really the case. When we mapped, and this was a map from 2019 after we did this road trip, when we mapped those petition signers, it's not necessarily coming from people who are exactly from Route 66. If you look at those clusters, they really correspond to population centers all across the United States. And we actually had signatures from outside the country, because we know that Route 66 is something that is meaningful to people who are in Canada, like Brian is, and internationally. And so one of the things that I took away from this is that Route 66 is a road that probably almost every American knows of, is aware of Route 66, has an impression of what it is. Um, and people really see it as their road. This is the real America. And so that was something that was, I think, really meaningful for me because many times, we in preservation, we see that the support actually comes much more locally. So, anyway, we got very close to getting the National Historic Trail designation in 2018. Did not get it through a twist of political things that had absolutely nothing to do with Route 66. All of the congressmen and senators, everybody loves the idea. So it was just, something else. We are still actively seeking it, this designation, and hope that we will have it in place before 2026 with the Centennial celebration. But one of the things which we completely did not expect, that I believe, I can't imagine how else this would have happened. A couple of years later, we had a phone call from some lawyers who said, gosh, we have a client who has passed away and they have left they have left their entire estate to the National Trust, and they have left it specifically for the preservation of Route 66. So it was a pretty substantial estate. It was actually $5 million that we received, which is pretty impressive. Except when you realize that there's one bridge in Tulsa that probably will require 5 times that amount just to fix, one bridge. It's also a drop in the bucket. So, we were trying to think about what we could do with this funding, knowing that we did not yet have the National Historic Trail. So again, obviously continuing all of that advocacy, but thinking, okay, what can we do with this wonderful gift? How can we actually try to meet the needs that are the greatest along Route 66? This happened right in the middle of the pandemic. So you can imagine that, there were a lot of businesses along Route 66 that were having a really hard time. People, I think, initially were not traveling. We're not wanting to eat in restaurants. We're not wanting to do things. I think a little later, Route 66 rebounded some, in particularly because people could actually travel in the bubble of their cars. So that was something that was a little bit easier for them. But we decided with this gift that what we were going to do was to really focus on how can we help Route 66 get ready for the Centennial celebration. And so, we had done a lot of work on Route 66. We thought we knew, some of the things that we felt should be done. But we also thought that it really shouldn't be up to us, that it was important to do outreach and find out, what do people on the road think are the biggest needs, and, what needs to happen. So we started in 2021, and we decided to do the AAA of roadside assistance for Route 66, with the AAA being an assessment, followed by assistance, followed by the anniversary celebration. So we had about a year where we did a lot of virtual outreach. This was back when people were mostly not traveling. But that, with the advent of Zoom, let us reach out to the state associations, to preservation groups, to humanities groups, anybody we could think of. We would convene them by types of group, or we would convene them by geography, and again, tried to find out, what are the things that was needed. We were again really hoping to especially provide support to some of the places and some of the stories that maybe had not been told in the past, as we had during the 2018 road trip. So thinking about places associated with Latinx, African American, LGBTQ, immigrants, women, looking at ways of kind of expanding that Route 66 story as much as we could. So we did that. We're now in the midst of our assistance phase, and I'll be talking more about some of the things that we're doing with that. And then in 2026, we're going to have the anniversary phase, which is still a kind of evolving concept. We're looking at different things that we could do for that. And we've also been looking at ways of bringing in some additional funding to support other activities, and doing all that we can to strengthen existing organizations like the Route 66 Road Ahead Partnership that I had mentioned earlier, to make sure that there's a good structure in place to support Route 66, not just through the 2026 anniversary, but almost more important, what's going to happen after 2026? What's in place to make sure that as much of Route 66 can stay in place for the second century? So some of the examples of things that we were working on, we took a multidisciplinary approach, and we had been aware of a place called the Threet Filling Station. This is a 1915 gas station that was built on the corner. It's actually right on Route 66, and it's right at the corner of a farm that's actually about 100 plus acres. But what's unusual about this particular farm is that it was one that was homesteaded by an African American family, the Threets, and had been operating up until maybe 20 years ago. I think there was someone living there until about 20 years ago, and then it had been closed. If you've been on Route 66 and you've driven through Luther, Oklahoma, you might have gone by this and may not have even kind of registered. You can see in the upper right-hand corner what it looked like, some years ago. So we've actually provided a variety of support to this particular place to look at ways of being able to revitalize it. It's still actually owned by the Threet family, and the Threet family really wants to find a way to turn it into a visitor center to celebrate both their legacy on Route 66 and to talk about the African American experience on Route 66. The Threets, in speaking with them, say that they remember their grandparents talking in hushed tones about people who were escaping the Tulsa Race Massacre and who were looking for a safe haven and who came. This was maybe about an hour outside of Tulsa, so close enough to be a place of refuge, but far enough away to be away from some of the dangers. So they remember their grandparents talking about hosting people. People used to camp out behind the gas station in the fields. And so some really interesting associations with this. So we did a couple different things. In 2021, we put this site on our list of 11 most endangered places. And that's actually another thing that you all can help us with. We're really interested in, every year we have this list that comes out. I personally would love to see something from Route 66, not because I would love to have a site on Route 66 be endangered, but again, just to kind of keep beating the drum. So if you do know of places on Route 66 that are particularly endangered, please let me know. We're actually just about to open up our application process for the 2025 list, and I would love to get any feedback on that. So we did that, which was a way of getting a lot of good press for the Threet Filling Station. The National Trust also has an African American Cultural Heritage Action Fund. So we were able to use that to give them a 6-figure grant that helped them do a lot of the stabilization work. So if you look here at the before and then the after in the upper right and then the lower right, you can get a sense of the kind of things that were done. That grant took them all the way, but it didn't get them all the way to painting the site. So we brought in yet another group from the National Trust. This is a program called Hope Crew, and that stands for Hands-On Preservation Experiences. And what we did with that program was to bring in a trades expert who helped. Apparently, they did not have a masonry person in the state of Oklahoma who really understood how to deal with this vintage giraffe-style masonry that the Threet Filling Station had. So we brought in a masonry expert, some students from a masonry training school. You can see one of them who's right here working on the project. And we helped them with both masonry repair and then also painting. And you can see that we painted both the filling station, but also painted the what was once kind of the gas station sign out front as well. So have done a number of different things, and honestly, they're not done yet. The place is a wonderful shell. They still need to figure out like how to turn this into a center to tell the story they want to tell. But we're continuing to look at more ways to work with them on that. So that's the one place where we got involved quite deeply. Another place that we got involved, and I think I get one here, was the Osterman gas station. This is a little bit later. It's a 1929 gas station in Peach Springs, Arizona. And in 2021, there was a microburst in Peach Springs that tore off the roof. It was a metal roof. You can see here in the picture with the fellow with the red shirt. just completely ripped the roof off the building. Also damaged a lot of the trusses. You can see a tour we had there in November of that same year. Some of those trusses were bent and needed to be repaired. So we convened a team of folks from Arizona, uh, different people who had an interest in this building, and tried to figure out how to help it. We did use our 11 most endangered list, and had this listed on that list in 2023, just about 2 months before it was going to be listed, because the roof was off and it had gone through winters, and because they have a lot of windy days there, they had another windstorm that toppled one of the walls. And in the lower left, you can see the damage that happened from that. So now, not only were they missing the roof, but they were also missing this wall. And we knew that if something didn't happen, there was no way that this building was going to survive another winter. This is a building that is actually owned by the Wallapai tribe in Peach Springs. And you can see in the middle kind of what it looked like back in its heyday, of when it was a shell station. So for this one, we managed to get a couple of smaller planning grants from the Arizona Route 66 Association. Arizona actually has some funding as well through their Heritage Fund, so we got some funding from there. And then through Preserve Route 66, we were able to give them a little over $150,000 to do the stabilization. And you can see in the lower right that stabilized wall. So that's all been rebuilt. It was an interesting process to think about this gas station, because the bricks that were used to build this were actually cinder blocks. This was a very popular thing in the early 20th century. Sears Roebuck actually had a lot of these, and there was a machine that you could get. And in fact, when the Osterman was built, there was one of these machines that they had gotten back in the 1920s, and they had made all of those bricks, all those cinder blocks, rock cinder blocks on site. We did work with the folks at the Wallapai, and we did salvage as much of the original bricks as we could from that toppled wall and from other kinds of places, but it wasn't enough. And we thought about maybe trying to make more bricks right there on site, as it had happened before, but that seemed to be a little bit of a challenge. And so we fortunately were able to find a supplier in the Midwest who still manufactures all of those different kinds of bricks, and we're able to order. You can see there the pallets. And so it was not insubstantial that they had to truck from somewhere in the Midwest all the way out here to Peach Springs, Arizona. The next step for this gas station is going to be painting it. So we are, the lower right, you can see here some of the traditional shell yellow and red. This is obviously a very different gas station, but it'll be mostly horizontal stripes, mostly white with some horizontal stripes. So we're working on ways to help them with that. So two of our kind of our projects where we've been involved more deeply. Another one that we have worked on, but then we gave a grant for, is in Tucumcari, New Mexico. And last May, there was a very intense hailstorm that hit Tucumcari. And this hailstorm was so intense that it damaged every single piece of neon in the town, broken pieces everywhere. And of course, this is on Route 66. Tucumcari is known for its neon. And so the New Mexico Route 66 Association and the Main Street Association started a GoFundMe to help with this work. And we came in and actually provided one of our grants as well to help both with the restoration of some of these signs. And you can see here the Americana Hotel, the slide on the photo that you can see on the far left. If you look closely, you can see some of those broken pieces of neon that are hanging down when the sign was not operational. But they were able to come in and to get the replacement pieces that they needed. You can see up here on the lift installing those, and the sign is now once again relit. There were a number of signs that they worked on. Here's just another one. You can see the Mexican food sign from La Cita. Also in the upper part where it's on the left where it's damaged, and then with being restored down below, and the work in progress. The other thing we also worked on, New Mexico has done a lot of work to look at how to do DIY neon repair. Neon is sometimes challenging for property owners. And so the folks who were doing this decided that not only would they work on restoring some of these individual signs, but they're also working on 2 different videos that should be done by the end of this year that will talk about things like how do I troubleshoot my blinking neon sign, and how can I recreate a sign that's been lost? How can I look at what sort of things do I need to have for basic neon repair? So another place where we did get involved. Um, in looking at Route 66, we knew that not only is it just about the buildings on Route 66, but it's really about the businesses and the people that you meet along the way. I mean, it's not just a kind of vacant artifact. And so another thing that we did that we supported is a legacy business research project. And we were looking at different programs across the country for legacy businesses and came up with this sort of definition of what a legacy business is. It has to do with the physical structure. So a building needs to be, be a certain amount of years old. It's got to have some kind of distinctive architectural features. It may actually have some kind of historic designation. But then also we looked at the tenure of the business. So how many years has this business been in operation? Has it been in the same family? Has the same business name continued over the years? And then also look at the kind of services that they were offering. So what kind of products or services do they offer? Does it connect to local heritage? Does it connect to diverse or underrepresented stories? Is it something that really contributes to the community? And we did these, and we're not requiring that every business has all of them, but we wanted to have some of them. So we were looking at ways of doing that. So we're now going into our second year, realizing that this is a very big undertaking to look at these what these different businesses might be. But it's been a really great project. And again, we wanted to make sure that there was some benefit that was coming back to these legacy business owners. So another thing that we did was to create a program. We actually did the first round this last year, a round of Route 66 legacy business grants. And you can see here some of our grantees, this Delgadillo snow cap that you can see in the middle. That sign at one point used to rotate and the motor had blown out. So their grant, for example, their $10,000 grant, helped them get a new motor so that sign in Seligman, Arizona now does still rotate. We've also supported the Marathon gas station, which you can see there, a wonderful site, helping them with some exterior improvements. Places like the Riverton Market in Kansas, where they have these great French doors, but again, a lot of decay that you can see there. So helping them do some restoration work on those. And then also in Tucumcari, the Odeon Theater, which has a wonderful old movie theater about a block off of Route 66. So that had a lot of needs, and we're going to help them with some painting and some carpentry work. So doing that, and we're going to actually have another round of those grants this next year in early 2025. So if you are on Route 66 and you see a business that looks like they could use some help, please send them our way. We'd love to be able to keep a lot of these places in business if we can. One of our legacy business recipients was the Blue Swallow Motel, also in Tucumcari. And they had a couple of different needs. Not only did that hailstorm back in May damage their beautiful neon sign, but if you look at the stucco that they have a very unique shell design in their stucco, which they have a craftsperson who they know can do that work. But the hail was so intense, it actually damaged that and chipped a lot of that away. So we were able to help them with a grant that will help them do some restoration work on that shell design. And we're also able to pull in a corporate sponsor who has been very supportive with us for Route 66, and that's Benjamin Moore Paints. And Benjamin Moore is going to be donating all of the paint for them to do their restoration. This partnership with Benjamin Moore is something that this is now our second year of a Route 66 focus. So Blue Swallow is one of our projects for this year. But last year, we worked with a couple of other places, one of which was the Roadrunners retreat sign, which is in the middle of the California desert. And that California desert is pretty brutal on paint. And the site, the buildings, many of the buildings had actually burned. And so this sign was sort of a ghost sign that had been left there. There's an owner who really wanted to bring it back and get it repainted and relit. They did get some support from the Park Service, but again, it fell short of what they needed to make that project complete. So Benjamin Moore helped us with all of the paint. It was all carefully matched to the original colors. And so you can see here on the at the upper left what it looked like before restoration, and then you can see the final product. You might notice that that Roadrunner was completely missing. There were pictures that showed what it was, but it was just gone. And so the craftsperson who we worked with on the sign was able to recraft that Roadrunner shape and put that together. And the picture in the middle shows in process with the restaurant part painted and the top not yet done. We're not quite done with this one either. They did get some additional funding, not from us, but from the National Park Service to relight this sign. And it's way too hot in the summer to do any work like that. But when things cool down, they are planning on getting the neon put back on. And then if you're driving through the California desert, you may be able to see this sign relit once again. I had mentioned that one of the things we were hoping to do as well was to help with the increasing the capacity of other organizations who are devoted to Route 66. So one of the grants that we gave was to the Route 66 Road Ahead Partnership. They had a program to give micro grants to women-owned businesses. And so we gave them $60,000 that they then gave out in 3 rounds of grants, $2,000 a pop, so really small grants. But just trying to find ways to be impactful in helping these small women-owned businesses on Route 66 survive. So, and again, part of our goal was to really help increase the capacity of the Road Ahead, hopefully to have them continue as a grant-making organization. Other kinds of things we were doing, we were looking at Asian Americana heritage along Route 66. We did kind of unusual things like had an artist activist from New York City's Chinatowns who traveled Route 66 and connected with folks and did a series of postcards that celebrate different Chinatowns or Asian Americana heritage along Route 66. His postcards are currently on display at the Chinese American Museum of Chicago, and they'll be there through just about the end of this month. If you happen to be in the area, you can go and check those out. We funded things like curriculum on Route 66 to make sure that people in schools could be learning about this. We have a person at the University of New Mexico that we're collaborating with on more than 50 stories talking about the hidden legacies of Route 66 in New Mexico, and then also working with Latinos and Heritage Conservation, where they brought in 3 young fellows who have been looking at Latinx history along Route 66 in California, Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas, and they've published several story maps that talk about their experiences and kind of their connection to Route 66. And you can see here just what that website looks like. This is how you can find that if you want to check that out. But again, trying to bring some diverse perspectives, younger perspectives to the work we're doing on Route 66. We also wanted to leverage our bequest as much as possible and find ways to better connect Route 66 to our site places on Route 66 to other programs that the National Trust had. And so one of those is a program called Backing Historic Small Restaurants. This was also a pandemic program. One of our longtime major sponsors is American Express. And American Express reached out to us about a year into the pandemic and said, we're really concerned about the impact of the pandemic on small restaurants because of any kind of business. That's one where, you kind of hard to go into a restaurant and wear your mask and eat food. So they put together this program. They, for the first couple of years, they supported 25 restaurants a year. And then last year and for the next 2 years, they're going to support 50 restaurants across the US. And at least 6 of those, actually a few more now because we just had one that was announced are Route 66 eateries. And you can see here some of the places that we've been able to support on Route 66. So restaurants is a place where we have a particularly robust funding for restaurants that would be funded in 2025 and 2026. Each restaurant gets $50,000 for exterior improvements. So whether that's restoring your neon sign, it could be for murals, it could be for electric vehicle attachment, it could be for outdoor seating. There's a whole range of things that would be eligible through that funding program. Grants have been one of the biggest things that we've been doing through Route 66. I've mentioned just a smattering of some of the places that we've been helping, but to show you just the kind of extent of where we've been working. This is a map of Route 66, and you can see here all of the different places that have received from us some kind of a Route 66 grant. And it's also color coded, so you can look at how we've been able to address some of these grants to particular underrepresented groups. So really have been doing work, all along the route. Some projects that are actually route wide, some that are, 3 or 4 state wide, and some that are site specific. Another initiative, and this is another one that you all could help us with. If we want to help places, we first have to know who they are and what they need. So we actually secured some additional funding to create a Route 66 GIS and crowdsourcing campaign. And this is something that you can find on our website at savingplaces.org. And a key component of this has been crowdsourcing. And I understand that in your publication, there's actually been an article that talks about this Route 66, Share Your Route 66 Story campaign, which is something that is a really easy way for any of you who have ever traveled on Route 66 and may have some photos from that travel to be able to upload a photo and a memory. And again, just ways of being able to look at many different perspectives, on Route 66. And to give you a sense of the kind of stories that we've gathered, here's just a sampling of a few of the places that I pulled out that I thought were kind of interesting. This first photo is actually taken by an organization called 66 for the 22. And it's a motorcycle organization that traveled the route to raise money for veterans' suicide, mental health, and PTSD. And so this was a photo that they had taken as part of that journey for their kind of shared interest. Sometimes it's a memory that someone has from long ago. Here's a picture of a train that someone remembered seeing as a kid in the 1960s and then had a chance to come back just recently. And this place that had been so meaningful to them was still there on Route 66. So again, shared that memory. Sometimes the stories that we get are from sites themselves. So the Munger Moss Motel, they're telling their own story about the place that is meaningful to them. And sometimes it's about people. This is one of the stories here is about a woman who had owned a restaurant, the Copper Cart restaurant, for many, many years. But again, it's not just about the buildings, it's about the people as well. It doesn't have to be a current photo. We've actually had some people who have submitted historic images of Route 66. You can see here this picture of a Chinese American restaurant, and it was submitted by a child whose family had owned this restaurant. He remembered growing up and being part of this restaurant, and then actually, sadly, the restaurant was demolished, which is why the historic photo is included here. And he said that it was unfortunate because he became a preservation architect, but too late to save his family's legacy. So this was his important memory. Some of my favorite stories are about just little quirky things, like little details that you might see. And again, those are so at risk of being lost. Again, different kinds of things that you can do. So that's really what I wanted to share with you about the kind of things that the National Trust is doing. But again, as I said, I would love to look at ways that all of you might be able to help Route 66 as well. And so whether that's by sharing your own story on Route 66 and uploading images and stories, whether you want to go and sign our petition for the Route 66 National Historic Trail and do that. Maybe you have a place you want to suggest as the 11 most endangered. Or, honestly, one of the things we realized is that with 2,400 miles of road, it's virtually impossible to have a preservation person who is out there patrolling the road all the time. So anytime that you happen to be traveling Route 66, I hope that you will think of yourself not just as a traveler, but as a steward who's looking out for places. Take pictures, share your pictures, talk to owners, tell them why their places are so important. Sometimes people who have things don't realize what a treasure they've got. And so make sure that, if you see something you like, tell the owners, and look at ways of being able to be a steward and an advocate to make sure that those places are around for the next 100 years. So thank you. I know, Brian, I think we have some time left for questions. If folks have those, I can stop my sharing.
Well, thank you so much, Amy. That was an absolutely fascinating presentation, and the work that your organization is tremendous. I mean, as I mentioned before, the SCA really, at this point, is what some of our members call an appreciation society. So we love looking at the pictures and hearing the stories, but we don't actually do that much as far as preservation and so on goes. But your organization's right in, and you're handing out the dough too, which is that's really what counts. Now, I just wanted to show you one thing. I don't know if we can see it here. I guess you can. So this is our newsletter, which comes out 4 times a year, and in the spring issue there was your blurb. It's not showing up very well, but it's the Route 66 Recollections Wanted, and it says exactly what you just said about if you have recollections, send them into, and it gives the savingplaces.org web address, so your Route 66 story. So hopefully those go straight to you. But one of our members on the chat who's watching tonight said he shared his stories, and he highly recommends that others do too. But this was absolutely fascinating. I have stayed at the Blue Swallow Inn in Tucumcari. That's my claim to fame with Route 66. So now we have lots of comments and questions here. I'm going to introduce Nancy Sturm first. She is our past president, and but her claim to fame is that she used to work for the National Trust, and she wanted to say a few words. So Nancy, you can unmute yourself now if you like.
Hey, Amy. Thank you, Brian. So, Amy, I have just been listening to your presentation agog. We actually overlap by 3 years or so. I worked for the trust from 89 to 96, and I was in the development office in Washington, and I worked with the major donors. But I had the honor of being the donor National Trust representative for the first National Trust study tour of Route 66 in 1993, which was a huge departure for that program, because previously they were taking, older people down the Mississippi and seeing the colonial, the plantation homes, and they'd go to Europe and all this. And I had to lobby to I was maybe in my 28 or something. I had to lobby and write all my roadside credentials to get to be picked as the representative that was going to be sure that the tour leaders did what they needed to do, and schmooze and all and which is really what the donor representative does for the National Trust when they have these tours. But we went on our tour with Michael and Suzanne Wallace. This is showing up backwards, but Michael Wallace is a folklorist, and his wife is a photographer, publicist. And Michael was one of the early, 1990, he published this book, The Mother Road. And he was the hired guide, the expert guide for the tour. And it started after the National Trust Conference in 1993 that was in St. Louis. And we started out the Coral Courts in a fabulous Art Deco kind of no-tell motel in St. Louis. And we traveled all the way over 8 to 10 days, I don't remember which, to Albuquerque, New Mexico in a bus filled with great fun people, which many of whom I converted to be SCA members. But in this book, we would unload at places like the Blue Swallow and the Blue Whale and the Trading Posts and a number of and we met all the state association leaders along the way, Missouri, Kansas, and we got autographs in this book. And these were like maybe the second generation owner of these properties, and they were just astounded that these like enthusiasts had come. And anyway, I'm just astounded because the National Trust like didn't do another roadside event, wasn't interested in it, only sent like the Historic Preservation Magazine person and me, because I paid my own way, to the recent past conference that the National Park Service did in maybe 1995 in Chicago. So and I knew that things were gonna the bottleneck was gonna unbottle when y'all moved from the pristine building, historic apartment building in DuPont Circle to the Watergate building, in the early, what was it, 2000s. And so I'm just astounded how far the trust is coming to being more man of the road, just not so elitist. And I just applaud all the work you've done. And want to say that I'm sorry I didn't meet you in '93 when you joined the trust.
I know, I was definitely here, and again, Michael Wallace is one of the heroes of Route 66, and that is the Bible. I've got my copy right here as well. So that sounds like an amazing tour, and maybe one we should look at redoing at some point. But we've been actually talking about looking at some different tour events that we might be able to do around Route 66, particularly with the Centennial coming up. So I didn't know about that tour. That's great. Thank you, Nancy.
Well, that's a great story. Amy, we have a question from Randy Turner, who says, has proposed legislation been standalone or part of larger bills or both? And any indication of the best approach, or is there any vocal opposition?
Yeah. So the answer is both. Currently, there is standalone legislation that's been proposed in the House. That the House version is the one that we're the most enthusiastic about. There's also legislation that's been introduced in the Senate, but we're not as crazy about their language, mainly because their language talks a lot about what the National Trail is not, as opposed to what it is. Like, it will not impede oil development, but that has nothing to do with the national. I mean, it's irrelevant. So we would like it to talk about what it will do, what it won't do. So that's what's pending right now. To be totally honest, I think we don't think there's probably going to be a chance for that to pass before the end of this year. There's just too much else going on, but we are working on lining up different co-sponsors, in particular for the House bill, and then hope that we can get that reintroduced. And we think that the 25-26 legislation is going to be the magic ticket. We have actually also tried the omnibus bill approach. That was actually what we did in 2018. And we had to pull that at the 11th hour because of a legal question that came up about what a National Historic Trail, what kind of oversight that meant. And it was that ended up being satisfied, where, yes, this thing that they thought that it meant, that it would impede something, was not true. And that ended up going to the Supreme Court. But unfortunately, because going to the Supreme Court takes a long time, it meant that we had to pull it from the omnibus bill. The omnibus bill can be sometimes an easier way to get things through with a package. So I think we always look out for different public lands bills and see if there's opportunities. Again, I think it's hard right now with an election coming up. It just makes it a difficult time. But next time we'll see. So.
Okay, well, that's very interesting. A lot of strategy involved there, no question. Laura Rozalski asks, is there a link for signing a petition and or supporting the proposed legislation? Now, another commenter here has actually listed the place to sign the, I guess, to get to the petition. Yeah, we have a link in the chat here for the petition. And there's also one for supportsavingplaces.org, which is your website. So they're here. So that question has been answered. Now, I have a question for you, Amy. I'm Canadian, and so we don't have basically the same setup or the same heritage legislation. In fact, I venture to say the U.S. is far ahead of Canada in this. But what's the advantage of having the National Historic Trails designation? What does that do for you?
Sure. So, a National Historic Trail, and you can look them up. I mean, these are places like the Lewis and Clark Trail, the Trail of Tears, the Selma to Montgomery Trail. So there's a whole range of them. I think that Route 66 would be one of the first 20th century trails, which I think is pretty exciting. And I think you all might be thinking that as well. But the advantage to the National Historic Trail, they can be overseen by a number of different federal agencies. We would favor having this be overseen by the National Park Service because the National Park Service has been most deeply involved with Route 66 over the years. And it does a couple of different things. There's a chunk of funding that goes to support National Historic Trails overall. So almost every National Historic Trail gets a budget allocation that can help to support an organization, for example, an organization like the Route 66 Road Ahead Partnership. So it can provide a little bit of subsidy there. The other thing that it provides is just staff time, federal support. So you can have people who can then, federal staff from the Park Service, in this case, can actually go out onto Route 66, can provide advice. There also are opportunities to enter into cooperative agreements with the federal government. So there's a pot of money that's available. And a cooperative agreement is similar to a grant, but what it means is that you don't just get money, you also get National Park Service to come and help you with the projects as well. So I think that it could provide a lot of really nice things. It would be a permanent designation, not to mention that, again, it's also a very prestigious designation, which means that there would be, it's just awareness and promotion. So it would both be promotion, but also some physical help, money help, and staffing help.
Okay, that's amazing, and you're right. I mean, why Route 66 doesn't have it so far is a mystery because it has to be one of the most well-known, at least, of historic trails. One of our members, Peter Ives, I've asked him, I've unmuted. So Peter, are you there? Would you like to come on and tell your story to Amy?
Yeah, I accidentally I didn't click on everyone, so I missed that. Yeah, I live about 100 feet from Central Avenue, which is old Route 66 in Albuquerque. And I'm behind the Monterey Motel, which is quite old. And then the old El Vado, which is even older, was made out of adobe bricks.
Yeah.
And it was saved, luckily, by one of our earlier mayors a few decades ago. Half of it is boutique motels, and the other half is little shops and cafes. And there's even a tap room in what was once the office building. And it's become pretty popular. It's worked out pretty well. The old flashy, garish, full headdress Indian neon sign was saved and protected and then rehabbed. So it looks pretty good. And there's been a developer bought the next door motel, the Monterey Motel that I mentioned previously, the same developer outfit, and they rehabbed that one. That one's more done in a mid-century style. Yeah.
They have great furnishings too. They've really done, even in the rooms, they have great mid-century furnishings. You live in a place, Peter.
So it's it definitely improved from what it used to be when I first moved down here.
Well, that's great, Peter. There's another success story. So there's some good news along Route 66. Well, that's all the time we have for questions and comments. Actually, Amy, it's just after 9. We like to try and wrap it up, but I just want to make a few closing comments. I'd like to thank you again very much for a really fascinating presentation. And I might say that, the SCA is sort of looking at what's the future of our organization. And I think we need to be more proactive in working with other organizations that are in the same that are of the same mind, and the National Trust being one of them, to get more into an advocacy role, because we really don't do that very much right now. We're starting. So I'm so happy to have you on our series, because I think there could be a relationship here that could be quite synergistic. I mean, there's nothing more core to the SCA's interests than Route 66. And just to clear up a little mystery, you mentioned that we are planning actually our 2026 convention in Los Angeles. And that's news to people that are watching tonight, but that'll be coming out a bit later. But that, of course, is the 100th anniversary, and it's also the terminus of Route 66. So we may ask you to come back actually next year, perhaps maybe do another Zoom to just help to promote that that conference and let us know what the latest is in your endeavors along Route 66. Now, having said that, I'd just like to remind everybody about next month, when on Wednesday, October the 2nd, at our usual time of 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 Pacific, we'll join Kathy Kickert, who will present Hollywood Signs, the Golden Age of Glittering Graphics and Glowing Neon. Kathy will bring us back to the wondrous time when a vibrant sea of neon signs illuminated the glamorous streets of Hollywood. Now, SCA members, of course, will be receiving the relevant details and the registration link by email. Others can register through the SCA website directly. I'd like to thank everybody that came out tonight for spending some time with us. If you're not a member of the SCA, expect an email shortly inviting you to join and enjoy all the benefits of membership. And keep in mind that tonight's presentation was recorded and will be available on the SCA website usually tomorrow, maybe a couple of days later. And so you or any colleague or friend or relative is welcome to watch it there free of charge. And of course, if they like it, then they can join the SCA as well. Now, is there any final words you would like to say, Amy?
No, I think I said most of it all. Again, I hope that some of the things that I shared with you about the ways that we're working to preserve Route 66 can inspire all of you to take some, small action, because I think that it really does take a whole community of people to be able to preserve a resource like this. So just, do think about little things that you can do, because little things can make a big difference.
Great. Well, thank you so much. That's good advice. With that, I'd like to say thanks again, and I look forward to seeing everybody in a month's time for our presentation with Kathy Kickert, and I wish you all a good evening.